Welcome into another edition of The Current Report, our weekly roundup of what's happening in the world of digital media. I'm your host, Chris Brooklier. It may not seem like it because we just hit summer, but Election Day in the US is getting closer and closer. And with the first presidential debate now in the rearview mirror, many Americans are looking to journalism to help them sort everything out. Brand safety has long been a concern for advertisers when they place their ads alongside news articles, but a recent study from Stagwell aimed to lessen those worries. The report found that it's safe for brands to advertise next to quality news content, regardless of the topic, and that ads next to controversial topics performed as effectively as those with quote-unquote positive news environments like sports and entertainment. Adfontes Media's Lou Pascalis was deeply involved in the study and spoke with my colleague Eilis Liffering about the future of news last month at Cannes.
Lou, thank you for joining me. First of all, this Cannes line is unlike any I've ever been to, in that there's just a larger presence of news here than ever before. Why are we seeing that this year?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are going on. I think we're in a moment in the United States, at least, and 2 billion people will be voting in the remainder of this year. And in almost every country where those votes are occurring, democracy is under some threat, an unprecedented threat that I haven't seen in my lifetime. So there's a great interest in news. And at the same time, advertisers have largely abandoned news because of unfounded fears about adjacency and potential getting the brand caught up in what's being called the culture wars. And so myself and others have been working very diligently to try to raise awareness for this. And I'm very grateful for numerous partners who have either shown up to help with that conversation. We did a session today at Sport Beach, which Stagwell donated the stage, with Mark Penn, the CEO of Stagwell, Mark Thompson, the CEO of CNN, Meredith Kopit-Levien, the CEO of the New York Times, and Barbara Peng, the CEO of Insider. And we talked about the challenge in getting advertisers to, return to news. And the simple truth is this: there's been an 80% decline in advertising and news in a 15-year period ending in March of 2020. Just let that sink in.
It's a lot.
An 80% decline. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that in that same period, there's been a 50% decline in people working in newsrooms. So we have a war on truth. We have active mis and disinformation that's largely being fomented by extra-national entities, let's call them that. We've got AI-generated content, which is flooding the marketplace with really misinterpretation. This happened to me. I actually gave quotes in an article, and within 20 minutes, it showed up on all these other sites, and they completely misquoted me. And so I think marketers are finally returning to the realization that if they don't fund news dies, journalism dies, and it is the fundamental underpinning of democracy, of society, of the economy. Jeff Green said it best yesterday: without journalism, democracy dies. He said it on the Wall Street Journal House panel, and it's the simplest and most elegant way to say it. And the only thing that will keep news in business is advertisers.
And why advertising versus subscriptions?
So the subscription model is hard, and there's great exceptions. New York Times just crossed 11.5 million subscribers. They're a global platform. They're the paper of record for the United States, arguably, the world. I think the Washington Post should be in the same place, because what's happening in politics in America is more important in Warsaw and in Tel Aviv and in, Rio de Janeiro. If you're a local paper, if you're a regional news platform, it's just not going to get you home. You're not going to have enough economic base. And you have to remember, advertising allows journalism to be available to everyone for free. And without that advertising, and if you can't afford a subscription, you're not going to have access to quality news journal. What you're going to get is the stuff on TikTok, which is false. And we have to recognize there are so many disenfranchised people today in our arguably two-class economy that we really need to make sure they have access to quality news journalism.
I'm very curious about what you think about all the publishers that are partnering with OpenAI.
I think OpenAI is the best example of what I call a Christopportunity I've ever seen. It's a threat to the quality of the news product, but it's also an enabler to much of what journalistic platforms do. Let's start with the basic fundamental building block of journalism. Feet on the street, talking to people, getting a ground level view of what's going on. Whether that's the young cub reporter leaning on the courthouse steps, waiting for the trial to get out so they can get the information, from the jury, to those brave journalists who are on the front lines in Ukraine and in, Gaza, who are risking their lives to make certain that the truth gets out. And we've lost more journalists to violence this year than in any year in history globally. You can't replace that with AI. No amount of AI is going to report from the ground. What AI can do is take those reports, mush them together without credit or commercial benefit to the people who paid the money to put the journalist in harm's way, and then put it on a platform and claim it's their own. That's what we see with MFAs. And, this is something that the Trade Desk has been on the front line of. And in the recent report from Analytics, Trade Desk stood out as the only DSP with virtually no MFA. That takes work. And for the majority, though, we're seeing a lot of ad dollars going to these sites, because remember, what MFAs do is they take that content, they strip out all the keywords that their advanced analytics tell them that the major advertisers are blocking, they put it into the auction for less money than the originating journalistic platform, and they take money directly out of the pockets of those. At the same time, the economic model of journalism is not viable in its current form. It costs too much. We've seen countless situations where newsrooms have been halved or worse. My favorite story is the Salinas Morning Herald, which is a 165-year-old paper. It was bought by Gannett, and they got rid of everyone in the newsroom except one person. And what she did was answer the phone for obituaries. So the only sign of life in the Salinas Morning Herald's newsroom was death. And I think it's a cautionary tale, right? So what AI can do is to do things like version headlines so that news competes better in the auction. What AI can do is to create different content considerations for different audiences, right? But it's got to start with a true journalistic product, and then the AI can help with the monetization of that, the distribution of that, etc. But I do fear that in many cases, the only option many platforms are going to have is to scrape the IP from somebody else and try to use the AI to recast it as something from them when it's really not.
I'm going to bring it back to brand safety, because there was a panel this week about, it was like a CMO panel held at 2B over there. And on the panel was the CMO of McDonald's. And one of the questions that was brought up was from a guy at Reuters. And he basically asked why they were moving away from news and advertising around news. And he said, it's not so much brand safety as much as like, the audience isn't there for us.
I think the reality is that when you look at things like the Stagwell Future of News study, which just came out last month, which Advantage Media was a participant in, along with the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, many others, it was unbelievable to me just how 50,000 people who were exposed to ads where one story is about daisies are beautiful, and the other story was, borderline anti-Semitism by the former president. No one saw a difference in the brand advertising there. The number one driver when I talk to marketers about why they're avoiding news is because of this fear of getting caught up in the culture war. And that study done by the Harris Poll with 50,000 participants showed it's untrue. And I think it's the first. I think we will need more studies. Why do it? And I heard a very good friend of mine, another CMO of a major company, on a stage say, why would I advertise in news when I can reach the same audience somewhere else without the risk? And I chased her into the green room, and I'm like, friend, what are you talking about? You can't reach the same audience elsewhere. News junkies only consume news, and they have the highest socioeconomic status of any vertical, right? They have spend power. They take more vacations abroad. They're more likely to have multiple postgraduate degrees in a household than any other cohort, and all they do is consume news all day. I fall into that category. And it seems like the facts don't matter as much as the perception that, gee whiz, somebody in the board is going to see something they don't like. They're going to call the CEO and I'm going to get in trouble. So let's just avoid it. And we've got to combat that. The clock is ticking.
Next, we're capping off this episode with one last thing. Netflix is making more moves as it continues to trend into the future. The Verge reports that the entertainment giant is phasing out its cheapest ad-free tier for existing subscribers and has started asking users in the UK and Canada to choose a new plan. This means users will be driven away from the $11.99 option and either be funneled into the $15.49 ad-free option or the $6.99 plan with ads. As of May, Netflix said it had about 40 million people globally on its ad tier. And if it gives these options to more customers worldwide, it'll be interesting to see how many people choose to watch ads. And that's it for this edition of The Current Report. For a deeper dive on all these stories plus more, check out thecurrent.com. And of course, please like and subscribe on YouTube, plus leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. And if you want to hear more from The Current, listen to The Current Podcast, where we interview some of marketing's biggest leaders about their keystone career moments and where the industry is going next. We'll see you next week.